Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Myth. So today we're going to continue the series that an analog in your pocket. Are you just happy to see me? And today we're going to be talking about the release of the Irem M92 core coming over from Mr. FPGA. Boogerman ported over Wickerwacker's M92 core, and it's now available for everyone to play on Analogue Pocket today. The core is still definitely work in progress. I'm going to be going through all of the games on the board, talking about how they're performing and whether or not you should be playing it. Before we get too far involved, though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But let's start with R-Type Leo right off the top, because it's one of my favorite games on the Irem M92, and interestingly, it's one of the weirdest R-Type games. That's because it didn't actually start life as an R-Type game whatsoever. But when I think of Irem M92, I think of this, I think of In the Hunt, and I think of Ninja Baseball Batman off the top. This is just an absolutely 10 out of 10 Hall of Fame level shmup. And its performance here on the M92 port over to Analogue Pocket is very good. Some of these games seem to be running slightly slower than they would on Mr. FPGA, but again, this is still work in progress. This is a 1.0 release. This is kind of just, let's get it on here, let's play around with it, and let's see what's good. And at least for R-Type Leo, the performance here is very nice. Wickerwacka did an excellent job getting this board onto Mr. FPGA, and he just recently updated the core as well, so I'll probably be talking about that in a video soon. But Boogerman has gotten this over to Analogue Pocket, and it is like 95% as good as what's happening on Mr. FPGA. And again, if you've never played R-Type Leo before, I can't recommend this game enough. It's going to be absolutely great to play on Analogue Pocket, whether you're in handheld mode or in docked. And that is the one nice thing about the Pocket. It's obviously way more portable than Mr. FPGA. But you'll see here as we get by the first boss, everything seems to be looking good here. I would say that any sort of issue in the port is going to come down to the speed. But as far as the graphics are concerned, I really didn't notice anything in this port that was making me think it was anything other than one-to-one visually with what the arcade board would do. And again, that's down to Wickerwacka's work over on Mr. But that's the fun thing about a core like the Irem M92. It brings so many different games with it. Some arcade games came out on a board, they never used it again. Some games like this came out on Irem M92, and Irem would use the board for almost a dozen solid games. So it's always awesome to have cores like this because it brings so many titles in one package, and we always love to see that. But again, as you watch R-Type Leo here, I just don't see anything that makes me think this isn't a great port. Now moving over to Ninja Baseball Batman, probably my favorite game on the Irem M92 if I'm being honest. Again, it is coming over so well, but I did notice every once in a while the music seems to dip out. But otherwise, visually, gameplay wise, this is the Ninja Baseball Batman that most people know and love. But every once in a while someone just says they absolutely hate this game, so if you do, tell me down below why. There seems to be like 10% of people that just cannot stand this title, which is always surprising to me. But again, on Analogue Pocket, this is a really good first public draft of the Irem M92 core port. It's working, all the games are booting, nothing seems to crash, there doesn't seem to be any huge graphical corruption here whatsoever. It is a very nice first pass at getting this core over on Analogue Pocket. And I know some of you just have the Pocket, but tell me down below, are you just a Pocket owner? Do you have Mr. and just watch these videos? Or do you own both? I'd really be curious to see what the breakdown is out there of people with Pocket, Mr., both, or neither, and just like watching the videos. But Ninja Baseball Batman is an absolutely wild time, and in this boss fight here, there does seem to be a little bit more slowdown than I would expect on the Mr. FPGA side of things, even if we're on the non-turbo core. But again, sometimes there can be variables in how much is on screen at once, so I'd have to do some real side-by-side comparisons trying to get the gameplay to be one-to-one, because the Irem M92 would slow down in its normal arcade hardware variant, and only with Wickerwacker's turbo core can you get those slowdowns kinda to go away. So it is hard to say if some of these slowdowns are just because of the Analogue Pocket port, or if some of these slowdowns are just because different things are happening on screen causing that slowdown to be a little bit more dramatic. But this just looks great. That's the main takeaway of this first test, at least for these first two games, is all of the visual appearance, all of the graphical effects, all of what made M92 seems to be working fine here. Even this gigantic baseball monster kind of reminds me a little bit of Vector Man. Looks good on the core on Analogue Pocket, so that is always great to see. Now let's move over to Undercover Cops, one of the best beat 'em ups on the system. I'm going to give you a sound sample as well, so you can hear the sound quality coming out of this core port. Go ahead and listen for like 35 seconds. I'll be back because I got a lot more games to show you on this board. sounds relatively good. Maybe that last sound effect was a little bit too crunchy, but I would say it is pretty much adhering to what you would expect out of the real hardware. And you'll see that go symbol right there with the arrow popping up on the screen. Looked like it had a couple stray pixels in it as well, but I have to go back and look at my Mr. Captures really to see. You'll see there's a couple stray pixels to the left of the screen as well coming in with those waves, but you really have to kind of pixel peep here to find any of the issues whatsoever. And Boogerman has done an excellent job at getting this over onto Analogue Pocket again. And a lot of times these things do come in phases. Not every single core comes out 100% ready to go. So many of these things come out as test versions or as work in progress versions. Bug reports come in, the developers and the porters go ahead and look at them, and then you end up in a situation where things improve over time. But I love Q-Ball here. You need to get him into the corner, so that Crusher will absolutely decimate him. But Undercover Cops is an absolute ton of fun. It's one of my favorite beat 'em ups of all time of this generation. It just has so much charm, so much visual flair, and so much going on. And of course, it always adheres to my rule of beat 'em ups. There is an elevator level in the game, and if you don't know me or my channel, I always mention this. It's not a true arcade beat 'em up, but there's not at least one elevator level in the game. They were always used kind of just to elongate the experience and give you some more gameplay at a very cheap development cost, but it's got to be there. Now, probably in my opinion, the most famous game on the Irem M92 is going to be In the Hunt. This is basically Metal Slug. If you were never on foot, you were just in these slugs and they were only a submarine to use. I would definitely say this is the game that slows down the most on real hardware, and Wicker Walker's Turbo Core definitely fixes up a lot of that. But it does feel like it is slowing down slightly more here on Analogue Pocket than it would on original hardware or on the non-Turbo Core over on the Mr. side of things, which is totally understandable. This game just throws everything and the kitchen sink at the CPU, and it would always lag even in arcades. It just gets kind of to be a slideshow in spots. And I'm not really sure, before you ask, if the Turbo Core could be ported over to the Analogue Pocket. It does require faster clock speed, so I'd have to check in on that. We'll have to wait and see if it happens. It would be a great thing if it could, but it wouldn't be surprising if it couldn't, so we'll have to just kind of wait and see what happens on that side. But again, another game, if you've never played this before, I can't recommend it enough. Just be prepared to die, and die a lot. This game does not hold your hand. It is brutally difficult, and it will kill you over and over again and laugh while it's doing it. But it doesn't really matter because they're not putting real cores into this. This is all virtual on FPGA, so there is no money changing hand. And I can't wait to see what the next version of this core brings, to see if some of this slowdown can be slightly aided, because right here, that does seem to slow down more than it would on real hardware on Mr. FPGA or on MAME, although I would say FPGA for Irem M92 is slightly better than the MAME implementation. And again, that's not to knock anything software emulation versus FPGA. All of these abilities to play these games on non-target hardware impresses me. They're just different versions of the same thing. But you'll see here as we get to the boss fight, everything looks good, and that is really something I'm taking away from this first round of tests. Graphically, this is like 99% exactly as it would need to be if you were playing on Mr. FPGA or real hardware, and that makes a big difference. Let's move over to another game that I absolutely love and that will absolutely chug the frame rate on real hardware. That is Gun Force 2, and I'm going to give you one more sound sample here because this is a long video, almost 20 minutes long, and I want you guys to hear the music coming out of a few different games because this game has an absolutely killer soundtrack. So go ahead and listen, and I'll be right back. Awesome soundtrack, and the sound coming out of the core seems to be one-to-one with what I would expect as well. But you'll see here, as this helicopter's at the bottom, it definitely will chug the frame rate, and it does again feel slightly slower than it would on the non-turbo Mr. FPGA core. But it's one of those things, everything comes with time, progress gets made in steps, and I'm sure we'll start getting some better speeds out of this. And if you've never played Gun Force 2 before, this is another absolute 10 out of 10 game. It's basically Metal Slug before Metal Slug would really exist, and it does have some shared developer lineage because some of the people that would go from Irem would end up working on Neo Geo hardware in the Metal Slug series as well. And you can absolutely see that here in the graphical design, in the overall gameplay, and the over-the-top nature. This definitely definitely has a lot of Metal Slug DNA in it, and it is just an absolute ton of fun. It's going to be another great game to play in handheld mode. It's graphically advanced, it is fun, it's action-packed, and just like in The Hunt, be prepared to die a lot because it is not an easy game, and I absolutely love every single level is slightly different graphically. You always get to see something new. But again, it's another game on the current M92 port from Mr. on Analogue Pocket that is working, and there's going to be a ton of fun. And honestly, pretty much all of these games work. I'm just showing you all of them to kind of talk about what you can expect and how it's going to perform on the Analogue Pocket. Now we're going to go a little bit more rapid fire here. Blade Master, this is a fun beat 'em up. Graphically, it's great to look at. It is just going to absolutely drive you nuts, especially in later levels. The enemy difficulty and their ability to just continually throw massive enemies at you and not let you scroll the screen until you beat them does get a little bit tiring. I would definitely put this in the B- tier of stuff on the Irem M92. It is a fun game. I do love the kind of hack and slash sword and sandal theming. Kind of feels like playing Conan the Barbarian without Conan, like a Roston game not made by Taito, but it is a game that can just kind of drive you nuts later on. This will just get so incredibly difficult. You will probably spend $50 to $60 in virtual quarters to try to actually see the credits scroll, and you basically just end up credit feeding this thing to see the end unless you get very good at it. But it does work great here on Analogue Pocket from the port of Mr., and that's always a good thing. But tell me down below, have you played Blade Master before, and what do you think of it? I would be curious. I'm assuming the common consensus is that it can be a little bit cheap and difficult. Now there is a Gun Force 2, so of course there is a Gun Force 1, and while this is a fun game, it plays way more like Contra, not in a bad way, but I would definitely say of the two Gun Force games on the Irem M92, Gun Force 2 is by far the better of the two games. This is fun, it's just not living up to that Gun Force 2 standard, but it's definitely one you should check out. It's one that's working well on the core, and if you like Contra more than you like something like Metal Slug, you may actually end up preferring this game, and I love those kind of fixed turrets there. By the time you actually get to them, they're kind of useless because enemies aren't coming from behind. You'll see here, this is definitely earlier generation M92. It's not as graphically impressive, and that's because the developers basically learn the hardware over time and get more things out of it as time goes on. It does have a little bit of Metal Slug in here still, with some of the vehicles that you could stand on and move back and forth, but definitely getting way more Contra vibes on this one, and this is one that seems to be working near one-to-one with the Mr. FPGA core that this project has been ported from, probably because it doesn't have as much on screen at once and it's not as graphically advanced, so you end up in a situation where the CPU isn't getting bottlenecked as much. Now, sticking to the beat 'em up format that we just showed you with Blade Master, we're going to go over Hook here. This is another fun beat 'em up, and obviously it's inspired by the movie Hook, and it is one of those games. It's an absolute classic. I just don't ever really love the movie Hook that much, so honestly this one isn't something that I've loved just because of the theming, but the performance here on Analogue Pocket is absolutely spectacular, and Boogerman again has done a great job of getting something like this to work on Analogue Pocket because the FPGA on board is basically half the logic elements as something like Mr. FPGA. Now granted, there are two different FPGA chips, but Irem M92 is relatively advanced, so being able to get this all to fit on Analogue Pocket and work as well as it does right now is an absolute achievement, and Boogerman should be super proud of being able to do something like this. And if you've never played Hook, definitely check it out. It is a super competent and fun game. Your mileage will just vary depending on how you like the theming. Even though Blade Master is definitely not as much fun of a game as Hook, I like it a little bit more just because of the fantasy vibes going on. Now on the shmup front, we have Lethal Thunder, and I would say this is kind of like a C tier shmup. It's never been my favorite game of all time. It is fun to test for these cores, but compared to something like R-Type Leo, this never even joins the same conversation whatsoever. But as far as performance is concerned, again, it is one that's doing extremely well. It seems like the earlier Irem M92 games have much less slowdown, and because it seems like Analogue Pocket has slightly more slowdown than Mr. FPGA, these are really good examples of what the core can do, and once there's more core probably added to this in the future, hopefully some of those slowdowns get one-to-one with real hardware. But do have a sound sample because the soundtrack is really good on this one. Sounds good to me. Now moving on to Major Title 2, this is probably the second best arcade golf game, directly behind Neo Turf Masters, but Neo Turf Masters will always have my heart. I do consider it to be the best arcade golf game ever made, but this is a ton of fun as well, and it's an awesome game to play on a commuter, just sitting around on the couch killing time. And big thanks to Andy D for helping with the captures this week. He absolutely laid up that second shot. He plays golf for me in the virtual world, and I play golf in the real world, and he's going to go ahead and do a birdie putt here and absolutely drain the ever-loving hell out of it, giving us a -1 to start. It's just a fun game. I can't recommend it enough. Give it a shot, even if you don't like golf. Now sticking with some more shmups, Mystic Riders is a ton of fun as well. I just recently did a video on this on Unported Playlist. It is brutally hard, and you would never think that it would be because it is so cute. This is basically like Irem's Cotton from Sega. It is a fun game, it's working great here on the core, and it has enough interesting mechanics that it feels slightly different than pretty much every other shmup you've played, because you can throw your broom in 8 different cardinal directions, kind of just moving it around the screen and using it to attack and back and up top as well, that you just saw there. So definitely play this one. It does seem again like it slows down a little bit more than I would expect it to, but again, there's so many variables in these games on what could be on screen at once and how quickly you kill enemies and remove their sprites from the screen. It is very difficult to say how much of this is 2D core port and how much of it is just a straight up variability in the gameplay and what it's actually doing. But again, Mystic Riders is a lot of fun. Don't let the fantasy kind of cutesy theming throw you off. This game is hard as hell, and it's definitely going to kill you time and time again. But there are some bad games on the Irem M92 as well. Superior Soldier here is the 2D fighting game, and this one is just all day long weird. The animations for some of the characters are straight up strange. The gameplay is a little bit janky. This is one that you test to see how it's doing on a core or a port in this instance, but you probably never end up going back and playing again because there's so many incredible fighters on Analogue Pocket. You really don't need to spend too much time with this game, and except for some reason if it's your absolute janky favorite. But tell me down below, have you ever played this one before? I'd be curious to see if anyone's played it and what your thoughts are. I'd assume that most people haven't ever checked it out, and if they have, they're probably not super interested in it. But again, Boogerman has done an incredible job porting this core over to Analogue Pocket, so it's running exactly like you would expect, whether it was on real hardware or Mr. FPGA, which is to say, hardware-wise competently, gameplay-wise not so much. And of course it wouldn't be an arcade board without a soccer game, so you do have your soccer for my European friends football. But that's the current situation with the current Irem M92 core port from Mr. FPGA and Wickerwalker's work over to Analogue Pocket. It's an excellent start. I can't wait to see it update, and I'm sure a lot of you are going to be very excited to start playing this today. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. If you have any issues setting up the core, leave those down below as well, and I'll try to help each and every one of you if I can. But we're done. Go play some M92, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.